Okay, folks, unlike a politician, when I make a mistake, I will own that and I will apologize. What mistake did I make? Well, I suggested in this video here that the ATF had only really become a cancer to the Constitution in the early 90s. Well, let me amend that a little bit because they were always a cancer, but I thought they had really only badly metastasized in the 90s. However, one of the many highly intelligent viewers of this channel commented on that video and pointed out to me that the ATF was corrupt long before then, and the stories that I uncovered during this research were absolutely nuts. So here it is. I am formally sorry for implying that the ATF was not always completely corrupt. You see, as that viewer said, the ATF was busy violating American civil liberties all the way back in the 70s. So buckle up, ladies and gentlemen, because we are doing that time machine stuff again. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel for another little Liberty history lesson where I learned something too. Though in these I usually do. So like I said, the ATF were carrying on their shenanigans all the way back in the 70s when they were still part of the Department of the Treasury. In fact, they hadn't even become their own separate agency within the Department of the Treasury when they kicked in the door of Ken Ballou's apartment and ruined his life unnecessarily. They wouldn't even fall into a separate section of the Treasury until 1972 and wouldn't join the DOJ again until 2003. But I'm getting a little off track here. ADHD brain. The Ken Ballou raid was a federal raid on June 7, 1971 on the home of Kenyon F. Ken Ballou, which became a cause in the debate between advocates of gun control and advocates of gun ownership rights in the United States and put the ATF on the radar of U.S. citizens like never before. But before I give you all of the details on this video is brought to you with the help of Blackout Coffee Company. Blackout Coffee is a family-owned roaster based out of sunny Florida that works to not only bring you amazing coffee, tea, and hot chocolate, but also partners with some of your favorite channels, like mine, and gun rights groups to help support the Second Amendment. So to get a great cup of coffee that you can be proud of, donate to some of your favorite gun rights groups, and help support the channel, go to blackoutcoffee.com/libertydoll. So back to this video. Now, being that this was 50 years ago, finding information was a little rougher than I expected. The biggest source was, of all places, the New York Times. Yeah, I was pretty shocked too, but apparently investigative journalism and mostly unbiased reporting was still alive in New York in the 70s. Who knew? I guess it was better to get a good scoop back then than to be lazy and just kneel down at the feet of their overlords. Maybe that was a little too much. Because we all know at this point that most major media is really state media, just with a different suit. So, directly from the writers over at the New York Times. Montgomery County, Maryland. September 25th, Kenyon Ballou went home from the hospital this week with half his body paralyzed from a bullet embedded in his brain on June 7th, when the police and Treasury agents raided his apartment seeking illegal firearms. The invading party fired 8 shots from service pistols, and Mr. Ballou fired 1 shot from a 6-shot cap and ball antique revolver. Talk about an unfair fight. Mr. Ballou's wife, Sarah Louise, describing the incident, said that she heard pounding on the door and shouts but could not make out the words. She said she shouted back, trying to find out who was on the other side. According to reports, his wife allegedly ran into the bathroom after hearing noise at the door and told her husband that someone was breaking in and to get the gun from the wall. He ran to the bedroom, grabbed his gun, and that was that. Who fired first is in dispute, but it is agreed that Mr. Ballou stood dripping wet from the bathtub and holding the pistol as the leaders of the raid, in plain clothes, stepped into the living room. Mr. Ballou's wife and his lawyer maintain that he is simply a collector of weapons, especially antiques. The authorities say that the items seized in the raid were 4 hand grenade casings and 26 guns, including cap and ball revolvers, shotguns, rifles, and flintlock rifles. Those dangerous criminal flintlocks. Federal officials have recommended prosecution of Mr. Ballou if his physical condition permits, but no charges have been filed. Near death for days after the shooting, Mr. Ballou, 28 years old, worked as a plate carrier at 2 Washington newspapers, can now say about 15 words and grins broadly to indicate pleasure. He seems to comprehend conversations and can walk arduously while wearing a leg brace and with support. The bullet remains in his head. The Treasury report said that an investigator from the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Division knocked on the metal door several times and announced in a loud and clear voice, "Federal officers with a search warrant, open up." But you know what? They all say that, and every time that we get body cam footage, that doesn't seem to be the case. So I'm not going to put my money on the ATF behaving well when there wasn't body cams. Anyways, the men outside the door heard either scuffling inside the apartment or a voice saying something they could not understand, according to the report. Now, while this is a noteworthy atrocity to be certain, it was just one of several violations of our rights to take place in the 70s. The next best source came from a Reason magazine piece called "The American Gestapo" in their 1980 issue, which honestly did not realize that Reason was in print for that long, and I wish that another media outlet would bring back that phrase, the American Gestapo. It's got a great ring to it. They had an article that mentioned several ATF abuses of authority throughout the 1970s. And it was a very long article. Charleston, South Carolina, June 20th, 1977, agents entered the home of Patrick Mulcahy and confiscated all of his collector's items valued at $15,000. Included were a gift from his grandfather when he was 11, the first item he purchased for his collection when he was 15, and an engraved piece worth more than $1,000. And remember, folks, this was the 1970s, and you could buy an inexpensive home in some parts of the country for $15,000. Money was very different then. San Jose, California, June 1978, 20 armed government agents raided a collector's show and didn't allow anyone to leave for 2 hours. The agents photographed exhibitors and bystanders and forced everyone present to sign warning forms. Kirkland, Washington, October 1978. In a paramilitary-style operation, government agents invaded the neighborhood of Mr. and Mrs. Elmer Tungren. A 4-block area was sealed off, the neighborhood evacuated, and the Tungren home surrounded. Some agents ransacked their home, while others stood over the Tungrens with automatic rifles. And these are just a few examples. Were they hardened criminals, you might ask? Not quite. Armed? Yes. But in all of these cases, these circumstances hardly deserved the violence and harassment rained down by the ATF. These people did not deserve having guns pointed at them and getting paralyzed. In Ballou's case, his guns were found to be properly registered and owned legally. He assumed the ATF were themselves criminals, truly a man ahead of his time, and conducted himself accordingly. In the San Jose raid, it was a gun collector's show of mostly antique firearms, hardly the stuff used by gangbangers. Patrick Mulcahy was charged with illegal gun possession, acquitted in court, and yet, even years later in 1980, they hadn't returned his collection. As for the Tungrens and that 4-block raid, agents found a couple of rifles and a .22 caliber target pistol that all were also properly registered. Yet, as Mr. Tungren described it to the press, the ATF came in like a bunch of stormtroopers. Again, indicating they have not changed. And those are just a few of countless cases where the ATF swooped in, oftentimes confiscating collections without an arrest or any charges, and then just made charges up, never returning the guns after acquittal, and the ATF got away with it by claiming the guns were appropriated for official use. And of these, the vast majority were rifles, not the handguns that even then were used in crimes, including one $10,000 silver inlaid shotgun found in Reason's Freedom of Information request. And again, that was $10,000 in the 70s. So just out of curiosity, let me know down in the comments if anyone else is also getting pissed off. Even back then, the ATF claimed to be doing the Lord's work, pointing to cheap guns that at the time were valued under $50 and were .32 caliber or less as the preferred guns of criminals, and yet went after gun collectors, dealers, and people who owned rifles, which, wow, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? The theory at the time put forth by Reason is that with the decline in moonshining, the ATF had to justify their existence. They raided 3,000 stills in 1972, but only 381 in 1978. They were worried that Congress and the public wouldn't find them important anymore, so they started going after gun owners using illegal tactics like entrapment even then. A government agency never gives back power, and that is exactly what happened with the ATF, a process that repeated itself in the 90s that led to horrible, horrific bloodshed. Even back then, the ATF was using and abusing their powers under the Gun Control Act, trying to trick people in straw purchases, even when, again, back then, you didn't necessarily need a gun license under the ATF's own standards unless you bought more than 6 guns a year. And even then, they were fudging around with the definitions of dealing and got a lot of people dragged into court because of it. In 1979, a former ATF director told a police convention that the agency planned to reduce the number of licensed gun dealers from 159,000 down to 30,000, a starting parallel to what we see happening today. So that is it for today's history lesson. Please like, share, and subscribe if you are new here. Ring that notification bell. Drop some comments down below. Again, if anyone has any other topics in this vein that they would like me to look into, please let me know, because it's interesting and fun to learn about. Sad, horrific, maddening, but interesting. And we need to know our history so that we don't continue to keep repeating itself. And on that note, thank you everyone for tuning in, and as always, happy shooting.